So in the first session, we discussed very briefly the development of what is called the Sephardic tradition up until to the expulsion. But of course, the picture is much more nuanced and broad than that. There are the centers in North Africa that developed independently, and there are different subcultures between different cities and different areas. There are the Jews of the Middle East, the Jews of the Balkans, the Jews in Yemen and other places around the world. But all in all, we could say that the Jews under the rule of Islam had a better ability to connect to the culture around them and to appropriate that which they thought was good. That caused some assimilation, that caused some abandonment of Judaism. There were many scholars in the 20th century, great historians, blamed Spanish Jews for being too cerebral, too logical, too rational, and they said this was the reason that they abandoned Judaism when they were faced with the Inquisition's demand to convert to Christianity, whereas Ashkenazi Jews were willing to sacrifice their lives. Later on, I mean, this is maybe 19th and early 20th century, mid 20th century, and till now, there's a new wave in history which questions: was it really the right approach to die for God's name in Europe, in Germany? And maybe what the Sephardic Jews did was better because they were able to save their lives and eventually preserve their tradition. But that also goes back. Now we have to go back in time to the beginning of Ashkenazi Jewry and see what happens there. And Ashkenazi Jewry begins when the Bishop of Köln in Germany invites several Jewish families from Italy, most probably from the city of Bari, to come and live in his city because he believed that they could boost the economy. And they accepted the invitation. They came over. We know of two families, the names, family of Machir and the Kalonimus Machir, like the son of Menashe, Machir ben Menashe, and also the Kalonimus family. Kalonimus in Greek means good name. So those early Jews who came to Germany were Italian Jews who also spoke Greek, or at least had Greek origins. The name of the family is Kalonimus. They came to Germany. That's important to know, why did the bishop believe that they could boost the economy? Because Jews at the time had a reputation of international merchants. And that is due to the fact that the world was divided between Christendom and Islam. And Muslim and Christians could not easily travel from one side to another. But Jews, because they were neither Jews, neither Muslim nor Christians, had more flexibility. So, like I told you, in Iraq there were the Radani merchants who traveled all of Europe, the Middle East, the Far East. They got all the way to China, and they spoke many languages. But the one language that Jews all over the world could communicate with each other was Hebrew. And there's a tradition or story that when Marco Polo traveled to China and came to the court of Kublai Khan, he communicated with him through Hebrew translators, an Italian Hebrew-speaking Jew and a Chinese or Mongolian, Bukharian Hebrew-speaking Jew who worked for Kublai Khan. So they communicated in Hebrew. So for the Bishop of Köln, that was an advantage of the Jews. They had connections everywhere. They speak Hebrew, and they could travel from place to place. So we brought them to Germany, and that was really a cultural shock for, even though they lived before under Christianity, but the Italian atmosphere and the German atmosphere were completely different. First of all, Gothic Germany was much more isolated and illiterate than Italy. And also in Italy, Jews looked more or less like the rest of the population, dark skin, dark hair, dark eyes. In Germany, they looked completely different. Also, the architecture and the art of the German churches, and that's something that they also saw in Italy, but this was intensified in Germany, were all. They see sculptures and statues, but most of them also depict the Judea Copta, or the synagoga, the Judaism, which is bound and degraded under the feet of the ecclesia, the church. So now Jews who live in Germany and their descendants find themselves isolated from the society. They look different. They speak a different language, of not only a different language, of a different branch of languages, and the religion practiced around them is, in their eyes, is pagan, with the plastic display of images, and for the non-Jews as well, the Jews are demons. There was a campaign of demonizing the Jews because they were considered the killers of God, and as some historians say, that is a myth. That is called a living myth, because the story about the Jews as the killers of God is not just a myth. It's a myth that was transmitted from generation to generation, where the first generation knew personally those Jews who killed God. So the Jews almost had no other option than to shut themselves in a spiritual ghetto, which became later on a physical ghetto as well. So this is the beginning of the rift of where we see Sephardic Jewry and Ashkenazi Jewry developing in different directions. They always interacted. There were always scholars who read the works of other scholars. One really interesting fact is that Rabbi Moshe ben Maimonides, wrote his early works in Arabic and his later works in Hebrew, because only after he wrote his commentary to the Mishnah and his Guide of the Perplexed, he realized that there are Jews who don't speak Arabic, and there's great demand for his works in the non-Arabic speaking world, and they had to be translated. But besides this cultural gap, there was also as I said, the impact of the rejection by Christianity, and also the development of sort of a love-hate relationships towards the Christian dogma and the idea of the crucifixion and dying for God. And Jews under Christianity felt that and that is a continuation of one trend in rabbinic Judaism that glorifies martyrdom, because if the Christians are capable of doing it for God, and if God Himself died to atone for humanity, how much more so we have to do that. So Jews almost actively sought ways to die in order to sanctify God's name, and that became. And if you don't die for God's name, you at least have to afflict yourself or deny yourself certain pleasures for the sake of God's name, which is also a trend that has developed in Christianity already from the 6th century on, where Saint Jerome and others rejected what they call Epicurean philosophy and said that you're not supposed to have pleasure in life. You have to suffer. The more you suffer, the more you destroy the body that was given to you. The greater portion you have in the world to come, the more you fulfill God's will, and all these things later on, God somehow interwoven into the fabric of some of the Ashkenazi thinkers, because they had to present something that could compete with Christian theology. And there was always, we have to mention that, always sort of kind of a dialogue between scholars of the non-Jewish world and scholars of the Jewish world, both in the Muslim world, more in the Muslim world, but also in the Christian world, because in the Christian world, the scholars were, especially in Germany, they were an island in an ocean of ignorance. And for an intellectual, for a scholar, it's very hard to continue without having someone to talk to. And in many cases, the people that they could talk to were Jewish scholars. So they would have that dialogue. So they're not completely isolated, but they are actually aware and exposed to the opinion of the fathers of the church, and they have to react to that. So, and later on, that is, like I said, the beginning of the difference between Sephardim and Ashkenazim, but later on it will show itself, display itself in different forms in Jewish history. And just to highlight the most important episodes, probably the events where we could draw the line between antiquity and modernity is the Emancipation and the Enlightenment. When first the Renaissance in Italy, and then the Enlightenment and the Emancipation. And in the non-Sephardic world, they caused at a certain point a rejection or an abandonment of Judaism. And that is because the rabbis were not able to accept and to embrace the changes, or to accept and embrace those people who are not 100% like them. So anyone who displayed some element of diversity or wanted to do something different, whether it's to read the Torah in German, or to not wear a kippah, or to shave his beard, or to dress with shorter clothes, or drink wine which was not made by Jews, where it was denounced, was pushed out of the camp. And once enough people were pushed out of the camp, those people got together and created their own movement. Whereas in the Sephardic world, most people remained within the camp. I mean, of course, there are exceptions. Most famously, Uriel da Costa and Baruch Spinoza, who were denounced as heretics and put under harem and degraded. But remember that was done by Spanish Jews who left Spain, expelled, persecuted by Christians. They were afraid of anything that will bring back this kind of heresies and persecutions. But Jews in other parts, in the Balkans, in the Middle East, in Morocco, kept evolving and developing, and were not did not experience the same divide and the paralysis, the religious paralysis that took over Ashkenazi Jewry. And this is the period now that we're going to start talking about. This was all led to that. We're talking about Sephardic Halakha, and the rabbis that I'm going to concentrate, to focus on, even though we will probably spread and talk about other rabbis, but mainly I chose three rabbis from North Africa, that were originally from North Africa. Rabbi Yaakov Moshe Toledano, 1880 to 1960. Rabbi Yosef Messas, who was born in Meknes in Morocco, and then served as rabbi in Algeria, and eventually came to live in Israel, and he lived from 1896 to 1974, something like that. And Rabbi David Shlush, who was born in Morocco, to his father, who was traveling from Israel and came back to Israel, and he lived from 1916 to 2004, almost 196 years old. He passed away last year. So 1920 to 2016. And those three rabbis represent the dynamic approach of the Moroccan rabbis that has been completely obliterated in modern times. All three of them have very interesting halachot that some of them would have been associated today, if you present them to a traditional Jew, say, oh, this is not Orthodox, it's conservative, it's Reform. But what happens there? I mean, those labels don't exist within Sephardic Jewry. What happened here? This is something that that has to do. That's why I give you the full background. It has to do with the heritage of Sephardic Jews versus that of Ashkenazi Jews. Ashkenazi Jews, up until the emancipation, even though they had small windows and opportunities to connect to the culture around them, lived in a bubble, tried to live in a bubble or in a ghetto in order to protect themselves as much as possible from outside influences. As a result, when the Enlightenment and the Emancipation came, they didn't have the tools to defend themselves from their influences, and as a result decided to shut themselves in even more and to completely reject all secular studies, all changes. One of the leading figures of that period is the Hatam Sofer, Rabbi Moshe Sofer of Pressburg, who coined the term Hadash Asur Min HaTorah. Any new idea is forbidden by the Torah. And interestingly enough, he himself was well versed in German and French and other languages, and he was a scholar. And maybe because he was so broad horizon, he thought that other people are not capable to maintain both, to be both well versed in secular knowledge and Judaism. So this tendency started, and what happened was that this cultural shock broke the Ashkenazi world into two camps: those who completely reject secular knowledge and scientific approach and methodology, and those who discarded large portions of Jewish tradition and halakha. And some came back to look for it later, because they felt that they threw the baby with the bathwater, because they said, we are not interested in Midrash, in Kabbalah, in this, it's all nonsense. But then they realized that there are beautiful things there as well. But what happened to the what we call the Haredi Jews or the Orthodox Jews was that not only they shut themselves in, they were afraid of any halachic innovation, because now everything became suspicious. You want to change this, but this will become a tool to change other things, and that will be the slippery slope. This is the most common argument that you would hear when you say, why can't we be more lenient on that topic, on that issue? And people say that's the slippery slope. You will say that this is allowed, and then they will say that other things are allowed. So, for example, when the Hatam Sofer was asked whether the cantor can move in the shul from the front of the shul by the ark to the center of the synagogue, he said, no, you cannot do that. Now, this is not a biblical commandment. It's not even a rabbinical commandment. It's just a matter of convenience, or even more than that. It was a question of imitating the architecture of the church. Traditional Ashkenazi synagogues look very much like the church. The pews, the more tight seats back to back, whereas Sephardic synagogues, which many synagogues in America now are built in that manner, are the teva is in the middle, and the all the seats are surrounding the teva, so people could see each other and the cantor. So if you come from a logical point of view, say, why not? Let's move the cantor to the middle, because it'll be more comfortable there. But the Hatam Sofer said no. Meanwhile, when Rabbi Yosef Misas was asked whether the Hazan could stand facing the congregation, even though it was very uncommon in Morocco, he said, it is not a problem. If this makes it easier for the congregants to hear, then why not? But that was not the only thing. There is a tendency that we see among Moroccan rabbis to create legislations for the well-being of the community. And it never stopped until the 20th century, where other factors stopped it. But emancipation and enlightenment did not stop it. They did not feel the fear of enlightenment that would cause them to to be paralyzed and to completely lost their will to introduce new halachot and new solutions. So, for example, in the already, I think in the 18th or maybe the late 18th, early 19th centuries, the rabbis in Morocco gathered to create a takana, or an amendment to Jewish law, according to which women will be counted among the legal heirs of a father when he passes away. It's called Yerushat Habat. In the Torah, if you look up the Torah, when the Torah speaks about inheritance, what the Torah says is this: Veish ki yamut untatemet nachalato levanav. When someone passes away, his inheritance passes to his sons. Im en lo banim untatemet nachalato lebito. Only if he has no male children, his daughter will inherit him. So the daughter is before other male relatives, but the sons are before the daughters. The rabbis explained in the Talmud that the inheritance is split evenly between all the male children, without the daughters being counted, but the man must provide for the woman or the women until they get married. And once they get married, they become the responsibility of the husband. The rabbis in Morocco, more than 100 years ago, said that this reality has changed. A woman should not be dependent on her brothers. She's a legal heir of her father, and automatically, when the father passes away, the inheritance should be split among all of the heirs. So that is an innovative halakha, and one that shows that they cared for the community, and women included. Another interesting halakha that I heard from a rabbi who was born in Tangier, so I don't know if it happened in Tangier or in other parts of Morocco, had to do with meat. You know that when you slaughter an animal, there are certain things that you have to check, and sometimes the animal is rendered treifa, not kosher, because there are certain blemishes on the lungs or other things. Now, what Jews used to do everywhere, but especially in the Muslim world, is to sell an animal that became taref, that became not kosher for Jews, to the Muslims, because they would eat halal. Halal means pure, and for Muslims, any animal that was slaughtered by a Jew was halal. So that was a sort of a risk-free operation, because you slaughter an animal, and if it's good, you could use the meat as kosher meat, and if it's not good, you could sell it to the Muslims. At a certain point, though, the Muslims decided to put pressure on the Jews to lower the prices of meat. So they boycotted it. They said, we're not buying your unused meat. And they thought that by doing so, the Jews will have to sell them the meat for a lower price. As a result, the Jews stopped shehita for a while, because they were afraid to lose money. It was a tremendous risk. We were talking about, in today's terms, even it's thousands, if not more, of dollars. So what do you do? But after a while, they needed meat. They needed to eat meat. Someone who knows, Sephardic Jews would say, "Oh, of course, Moroccan, they have to eat meat." So there's some truth to that. But instead, the rabbis didn't say, "No, we're not going to eat meat." Instead, what the rabbis did was this: they got together, they gathered all rabbis, and they said, "Let's find a solution to this problem." What will be the solution? We will put together all the lenient opinions that can be found in halakha regarding the kashrut of an animal. Meaning, we find a blemish on the lung, let's say, right? The majority opinion says it's not kosher, but there's one rabbi who says it's okay. We're going to rely on him. Now we found a problem with the kidney. The same rabbi who says that the lung is okay says that the kidney is not okay, but there's another rabbi who says, we'll put them all together. We'll combine all the lenient opinions. And they did that, and they restarted the shehita, and there was not one non-kosher animal. In a way, you could say that what they did, they reinstituted biblical law and bypassed all the rabbinical fences that were created in Talmudic times in order to help the community deal with that crisis, and they succeeded. Also, about the same thing, Rabbi Yosef Misas writes that when they traveled in Morocco, they would move from city to city, and those cities were like their own subcultures. Each one of them had different practices and different laws of kashrut. And he said, even though we knew that our practices of kashrut are not kept in that city, meaning they're kosher, but with different practices, we would ask no questions. Whenever we travel, we eat of the local meat and of the local kashrut without, which of course is not applicable today in Orthodox Judaism. I had cases of people in my house questioning the kashrut of food and even opening the garbage to look, for the wrappers to see, if it's right or wrong. But that was not that. And one last example, and it has to do with the mikveh, because Penelope mentioned that she worked with the mikveh, and it's interesting. The rabbis in Morocco and in Iraq ruled more leniently regarding which type of mikveh would be qualified as a mikveh. Even though traditionally we read that you need to have rainwater that are collected in a special way and delivered to the mikveh, the recorded question and answer that we have is from Rabbi Abdallah Somech from Baghdad, who was asked a question by the Jews of India in Calcutta. They asked him whether, is that your great-grandfather? So Rabbi Abdallah Somech...
About him, I would appreciate that. Not now, at some point.
Of course. So Rabbi Abdallah Somech was asked by Jews in India, I think it was in Calcutta, whether they could use the municipal water system as a mikveh. So water that are being brought by pipes into the houses, can they be used as mikvehs? And he answered positively. So that was a major move that accommodated a lot of women go to the mikveh. And an article by Rabbi Yossi Azoz I sent a while ago, maybe if you want I can send it to you, he shows that actually in America, up until the 50s, many mikvaot relied on that psak, relied on that halakha, and allowed the mikveh to be filled by connecting to the municipal water system. And in the 50s, I mean, and not only in the 50s, like from the 40s on, there was an influx of rabbis who came from Europe who attacked this approach vehemently, and eventually they were able to close all the mikvaot that worked like that and demand the mikveh according to the traditional view that cost sometimes millions of dollars. Now, two important insights or anecdotes are related to that. I spoke with a friend of mine who's a Moroccan rabbi of Moroccan origin, born in Canada, but he's more Haredi, and he said, "Are you aware of the more lenient psak of Moroccan and Iraqi rabbis regarding the mikveh?" I said, "Of course. He says, "Yeah, I heard that in Morocco also the rabbis allowed women to go and do tevilah and dip in any body of water, even something that was gathered in the house from municipal water." And he told me, "I'm surprised that they did that." I asked him, "Why are you surprised? What is the problem?" And he said, "I'm surprised because Moroccan rabbis, Moroccan Jews, were very very committed to halakha. So why did the rabbis see the need to make such a lenient ruling for them?" That was his question. And I told him that it's exactly the other way around. The Moroccan Jews were respectful of and committed to halakha because the rabbis were able to find the more lenient and welcoming approach. if they would have been strict, those people would have been pushed away. And that is one thing. The other thing is that what happened in America in the 50s after the victory of the I would say extremist rabbis in their war against this kind of mikveh, what they caused was the segregation of the Jewish communities. Because when you could build a mikveh in every little town, every hamlet, you could go to the mountains and build a mikveh within, in your house. There should be a jacuzzi or a bigger, like a spa. But they demanded that, you build a mikveh that is extremely expensive, and only large communities could allow themselves to build such mikvehs. So they caused people who were observant and lived in small communities spread all over America to accumulate and to congregate in, say Baltimore, Lakewood, New York, and places like that. And as a result, caused the connection between Jews and the larger American population to sever. So there were far-reaching results that they have not seen. And that is where I think the crux of the encounter of halakha with life. This is where it happens. This is, for me, Sephardic halakha is what it's all about. It's about understanding the full picture and the consequences of that. What I see right now, it's not whether I decide whether this mikveh is kosher or not, whether this meat is kosher or not, whether I should read this prayer or not, but rather, how is it going to impact the community? How is it going to maintain the integrity of the community and make people feel comfortable and connected to their tradition and laws? So that is that I think is in the gist of all the halachot that we're going to review, mainly from Rabbi Toledano, Mesas, and Shlush, but hopefully also from other rabbis as well.